My name is Walter Hensley, and I turned 74 this past January. I live alone in a quiet town in Iowa, in a modest two-bedroom house that's too big for one person but too filled with memory to let go of. I've been retired for over a decade now, having worked as a tax consultant for most of my adult life. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was steady and honest, and it gave my late wife, Donna, and me a comfortable enough life. We were married for 43 years before she passed away from lung complications that took her faster than I could brace myself for. Since then, my world has gotten smaller, quieter, a little dimmer. I cook for one, talk to the television more than I'd like to admit, and take long walks mostly for the sake of routine rather than joy. There are days when I forget what it feels like to be truly needed. Donna and I had one child, our daughter Cindy, who's now 46 and lives about 30 miles from me in a well-kept neighborhood on the edge of Des Moines. She runs an online cosmetics business, which, if the ads and articles she shares on social media are any indication, is thriving beyond anyone's expectations. I suppose I should be proud of her. In fact, I was. When she first came to me 7 years ago with the idea for the business, she was just divorced, overwhelmed with debt, and couldn't even get a business loan because her credit was ruined. She said she needed help, real help, to get it off the ground. She had the drive, the market knowledge, and the passion, but none of the resources. She promised me it would only be temporary, just until the business stabilized. At the time, I had some money saved up, a sizable portion of which had come from selling off Donna's childhood home in Cedar Rapids after she passed. I hadn't planned to spend it. Certainly not that way, but when your child comes to you asking for a lifeline, what else are you supposed to do? So I helped her. Not just with money. I used my clean financial history and name to register the business under my own ownership, since any official documentation under Cindy's name would have been flagged. I signed the lease on her office space. I personally met with vendors. I read through contracts. I filed her taxes the first 2 years. I even paid out of pocket for her first marketing consultant, $18,000 all told. In all legal respects, the business was mine, but morally, emotionally, it was always hers. That's what I told myself, and that's what she agreed to, too, promising to switch ownership back to her once her credit recovered and she could refinance the business under her own name. That never happened. Every year, she came up with a reason to delay, something about not wanting to rock the boat, fearing instability in the market, or promising she was almost there. I didn't press. She was doing well, and I wanted her to keep doing well. More than that, I didn't want to jeopardize our already fragile relationship. After her divorce, Cindy became guarded, more distant than she used to be, and I worried that any push from me, no matter how gentle, might widen the growing space between us. We used to be close when she was little. She was a bright girl with an enormous laugh that filled the house with light. Donna and I adored her. She used to follow me around the yard when I mowed the lawn, pretending to be my assistant. I still keep one of her childhood drawings taped to the inside of my kitchen cabinet. It's faded now, but I can still make out the stick figure version of me with a cape, labeled Super Dad. But that little girl is gone now, replaced by a woman who sees the world in terms of output, branding, value, and time blocks. I don't think she reads books anymore. She sends emails to me instead of calling. On holidays, I receive a photo card of her and her assistant staff, not handwritten notes. I tried not to take it personally. I told myself people change, and maybe she was just busy. Maybe I was the one being sentimental. But with every passing year, every missed birthday, every polite but mechanical phone call, that hope grew thinner. My life, meanwhile, has become quieter, lonelier. After Donna died, I didn't remarry. I don't go to church as much as I used to. Most of my old friends have either moved to Arizona or moved on from this world. I get by. I do crosswords in the morning with my coffee. I make soup on Sundays. I feed the birds. I call Cindy every so often, though she rarely picks up. I leave voicemails she doesn't return. I've learned to accept the silences. Some weeks, they're all I have. There's a sense of becoming invisible that creeps in as you age. First, subtly, and then all at once. You go from being the foundation of the family to the background noise of their lives. You're still standing in the same place, but they've all moved forward without you. Sometimes I walk by the small bookshelf in the hallway and catch sight of the framed wedding photo of Cindy and her ex-husband. I remember how proud I felt walking her down the aisle. I had no idea then that that version of her was already slipping away. Her business success seemed to come at a cost, not just to her time or emotional availability, but to her basic warmth. And while she proudly tells people she built everything from scratch, I never heard her mention my name in any of those articles she got featured in. Not once did she say, "I couldn't have done this without my father." It was as if I had been neatly cropped out of the story of her life, an inconvenience left on the editing floor. Still, I told myself I wasn't doing it for credit. I was doing it for love, for Donna's memory, for that little girl with the cape and the smile. I reminded myself of that whenever I saw Cindy's company grow. When she got her first full-time employee, when she moved into a bigger office, when she posted about closing 6-figure months, I'd sit there, reading the captions on her Instagram post from my ancient desktop computer, smiling at her success and swallowing the sour ache of being so utterly forgotten. It's not that I expected much. A thank you would have been enough. A dinner together, a visit, a sign that I mattered to her, not just when she needed something, but because I was her father. But that call never came. That visit never happened. And I began to wonder, not loudly, not bitterly, just with quiet resignation, if maybe in her world I'd already died, if maybe I was just a memory to her, a name on a registration form, a useful relic. And then, a few weeks ago, I called her. I needed a ride to the doctor's office. My knees have gotten worse lately, and driving has become harder. It wasn't a big ask. I could have called a cab, but I thought maybe, just maybe, she wouldn't mind helping her father. Maybe it would give us a chance to talk. Maybe we could go to lunch afterward. But she didn't answer. Then, the next day, she called back and left a voicemail that lasted less than 30 seconds. She said she was too busy, that I should learn to be more independent. And then, just before hanging up, she said it offhandedly, without anger or emotion, like it was a simple fact. "You're just a burden now." I played that message a dozen times. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The word burden clung to the inside of my chest like something rotting. All this silence, all the neglect, all the ways she had slowly carved me out of her life, they suddenly made sense. It wasn't an oversight. It was a decision, a strategy. I wasn't someone she forgot. I was someone she had moved past. Someone she'd rather not be reminded of. I sat at my kitchen table for hours that night, the voicemail echoing in my ears. "You're just a burden now." But what Cindy didn't know, what she had clearly forgotten, was that the business she now paraded as her own still had my name on every legal document. I was the registered owner. I had access to all the bank accounts. I still received every quarterly tax notice. She had tried to erase me from the emotional narrative of her life. But legally, technically, I was still the foundation she stood on. And suddenly, I wasn't sure I wanted to hold her up anymore. That voicemail marked the beginning of a slow internal shift, like something quietly snapping loose inside of me. For the first day or two, I did what I'd always done when Cindy hurt me. I rationalized. Maybe she was just overwhelmed. Maybe she didn't mean it the way it sounded. Maybe she was venting, and I caught the worst of it. I went back and replayed it again, searching for some different inflection, a hidden tone of affection or even tired affection, but it was the same every time. Flat, dismissive, surgical. "You're just a burden now." That wasn't something you said by accident. That wasn't a slip of the tongue. That was a conclusion she had come to long ago and finally allowed herself to voice. I tried not to spiral, but the silence that followed made it harder. Days passed without a follow-up. No apology. No awkward text trying to explain herself. No invitation to talk it out. I sat at my kitchen table each morning, eating the same peanut butter toast I'd eaten since Donna died, drinking lukewarm coffee and waiting for a phone that never rang. I watched the squirrels chase each other across the fence outside, watched the shadows move across the carpet as the hours passed. I began to take walks more often, not because I particularly wanted the exercise, but because the walls of my house had started to feel like they were leaning in, whispering doubts I didn't want to hear. One Thursday morning, about a week after that message, I found myself sitting in my garage, looking at an old plastic storage bin filled with business records, contracts, invoices, email printouts, tax documents. Things I had organized meticulously in the early years of Cindy's business, back when I still believed we were building something together. At the very bottom of the stack was a brown accordion folder with the original incorporation documents. My name, Walter T. Hensley, was printed in bold as the registered owner and founder. The date, March 3rd, 7 years ago. That folder felt heavier than it should have, as if the paper inside carried the weight of the years I'd allowed myself to be used. I opened the folder slowly and stared at the line that read, "Sole Legal Owner." It was my signature on every page. That evening, I turned on my old desktop and opened the email account I'd once used for the business. Cindy had taken over all communications years ago, and I hadn't logged in since. But the account was still active, and the inbox was still receiving forwarded copies of official notices, sales reports, vendor statements, trademark renewals, and, most notably, a letter from a private investment firm dated 2 weeks prior. The firm had made an offer to acquire a majority stake, 51% in Cindy's company, for $1.2 million, contingent upon due diligence and the signature of the registered owner. They had sent the email to Cindy's work address and copied the legal owner email as a formality. That email had sat in the inbox, unread, like a sleeping match beside dry timber. I read the letter 3 times. The name of the firm wasn't familiar, but it looked legitimate. Their proposal outlined a timeline, outlined their offer, and specified that they would require confirmation of ownership, including identity verification of the legal registrant. They expected a response within 10 days. I checked the date. Only 3 days remained. I didn't sleep well that night. My mind went in every direction. Rage, disbelief, heartache, betrayal. I pictured Cindy on the phone with these people, discussing a deal that could change her life. I pictured her smiling in some conference room, shaking hands, accepting praise. I imagined her telling them the same line she told the magazines. I built this business from scratch. Except she hadn't. Not legally. Not financially. And not morally. By morning, my heart had stopped asking questions and started seeking answers. I printed the letter and drove to town, to the old law office where Donna and I had finalized our will. The lawyer, Mr. Callahan, still remembered me. He was older now, gray at the temples, slower with his words. I explained the situation to him in as much detail as I could. When I showed him the paperwork, he nodded solemnly. "You understand," he said, tapping the folder with a thick finger, "that by law you own the company. She cannot legally sell any part of it without your approval." "I understand," I replied, though hearing it aloud still felt unreal. "She never transferred the ownership." "No," I said. She kept saying it wasn't the right time. Mr. Callahan sighed and leaned back in his chair. Then she's operating under the assumption that you won't interfere, that she can go ahead and make deals and count on you to sign after the fact. What if I don't want to? I asked. Then she's stuck, he said, and the investors will walk away. I left the office with a strange cocktail of emotions. Vindication, sadness, a growing determination I hadn't felt in years. On the drive home, I passed by the bakery Donna used to love, and for a moment I could almost hear her voice in the passenger seat. She would have known what to do. She would have told me to stand up for myself. She would have reminded me that love is not license, and forgiveness does not mean erasure. That afternoon, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, and when I opened it, I saw a man in a grey suit holding a folder and a clipboard. He introduced himself as Daniel Green, legal representative of Cindy's company. "Mr. Hensley," he said with a polite smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, "I've been sent on behalf of your daughter to request your signature on these acquisition documents." He held out the clipboard like it was a newspaper subscription, something I should be eager to sign. I looked him over carefully, then glanced at the papers. "Has Cindy spoken to you about the ownership of the company?" He hesitated. "She said the paperwork would be a formality." "A formality," I repeated, more to myself than to him. I took the documents, flipped through the pages. My name was listed as the owner, just as I expected. My signature was the last missing piece. Without it, nothing could proceed. "I'll need to review this," I said. "You'll have my answer soon." He gave me a smile that tried to be warm, but landed somewhere between forced and impatient. "Of course, but I would advise timeliness. The investors are eager to move forward." After he left, I sat at the kitchen table with the papers spread in front of me. I thought of Cindy's voice, flat and final. "You're just a burden now." I thought of all the years I waited for a thank you, for an invitation, for a simple gesture of connection. I thought of how easily she had erased me, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel guilty. I felt clear. She may have forgotten who built her foundation, but I hadn't. And now I had a decision to make, one that would shift the balance of everything between us. I didn't sign the papers. I didn't call Cindy. I didn't send a reply to the legal representative or write an email to the investors. Instead, I did nothing for 3 days, or at least it appeared like nothing. But silence, when chosen with intention, becomes its own form of action. I waited. And then, like thunder that follows lightning, came the consequences. On the 4th day, early in the morning, my landline rang. It startled me, as most calls do nowadays, but I recognized the number immediately. It was Cindy's office. I stared at the phone until it stopped ringing, let the machine pick it up. Her voice came through the speaker, clipped and breathless. "Dad, it's Cindy. We need to talk. I'm coming over this afternoon. Please be there." She didn't wait for confirmation. She didn't ask if I was available. It wasn't a request. It was an order. For a moment, I was tempted to leave the house, go for a long walk, disappear for the day, just to see her face the silence she so often handed to me. But a stronger part of me, the one that had spent too many years looking the other way, was done running. I made coffee, cleaned the kitchen, and sat by the front window with the incorporation folder on my lap like a badge. At precisely 2:17 p.m., Cindy's black SUV pulled into the driveway. She stepped out in heels, her jacket folded over one arm, sunglasses perched on her head, and the ever-present phone clutched in her hand like a weapon. Her expression was unreadable, but there was a tightness in her jaw I hadn't seen since her divorce. She didn't knock. She walked in like she used to when she was a teenager, when she still saw this house as her home. That was a long time ago. "Hi, Dad," she said, setting her things on the hallway table. "We need to clear the air." I nodded and gestured to the dining table. She sat down across from me, folding her arms. "Daniel said you received the papers." "I did," I answered, careful not to sound hostile. "And you haven't signed them?" "No." There was a pause. She licked her lips, adjusted in her seat. "Okay. Look, I know this probably all feels sudden to you, but this deal is important. It's a big step forward for the company. For me." I let the silence grow just long enough to become uncomfortable. "You mean my company?" I said. Her eyes narrowed. "Oh, come on, Dad. You know what I mean." "No," I said. "I don't think I do. You run the company, but legally, it's mine. Has been for 7 years. She exhaled sharply. "We've been through this. It was a technicality. You helped me when I needed help. But that was years ago. You said you didn't care about credit or ownership." "I said I didn't need thanks," I replied. "I never said I'd be invisible forever." Her eyes flickered with something. Fear, maybe. Or realization. "So what is this?" she asked. "Some kind of revenge." I shook my head slowly. "No, it's the first time I've decided to stop letting you walk over me." She stood abruptly, pacing. "You have no idea how much work I've put into this, how many nights I've stayed up, how many sacrifices I've made. Do you think it's easy being a single woman running a company in this economy? I built everything from the ground up." "With my money," I said calmly. She turned toward me, her voice rising. "You think you can just hold this over me forever? Is that what this is? You want to ruin the deal just to teach me a lesson?" "I want you to remember how it started," I said. "That's all. I want you to acknowledge the truth." She laughed bitterly. "You want a parade? A plaque? Fine. You helped. Is that what you want to hear? You helped me when I was drowning. But that doesn't give you the right to control me forever." "I'm not trying to control you," I said. "I'm trying to stop you from erasing me." There was a long silence. Then she softened her tone, sat back down. "Look, I get it. Maybe I haven't been as present as I should have been. Maybe I said things I didn't mean." Her voice trembled slightly. "But I'm asking you now, please, sign the papers. Let me move forward. Don't sabotage this." For a brief second, I saw the girl she used to be. Vulnerable, pleading, reaching. But it was an echo, not a presence. I had to remind myself that this wasn't a conversation between father and daughter. It was a negotiation. And in a negotiation, weakness is currency. "I'm not signing anything until we talk about terms," I said. Her face hardened again. "Terms?" "Yes," I said. "I want to restructure ownership before I approve any sale." Her jaw clenched. Unbelievable. "You want a cut?" "I want to be recognized," I said. "If the business sells for over $1 million, I want my share invested into something meaningful, something long-term, a legacy." She scoffed. "Like what? A statue in the park?" "No," I said quietly. "A foundation, in Donna's name. A fund to help women like you once were, starting over without support." She stared at me like I had slapped her. "You think this will make you look good? You think you can rewrite the narrative now?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She stormed out 5 minutes later without saying goodbye, the door slamming behind her so hard it rattled the picture frames on the wall. I sat there in the aftermath, wondering if I had just destroyed the last bridge between us, or built a boundary I should have built years ago. The next morning I received a letter by courier. It was from her lawyer. Not the friendly Daniel from before. This one was colder, more formal. The letter stated that Cindy was initiating proceedings to assume control of the company on the grounds of mental and administrative incapacity of the legal owner. Attached was a fabricated doctor's note, something vague about early signs of cognitive decline. It was dated 2 months ago. I read it twice and set it down. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from fury. She was going to try to take everything, not just the business, my name, my dignity, my memory. The message was clear. If you won't sign willingly, we'll make you irrelevant. She'd made her move. Now it was my turn. The accusation of mental incapacity changed something fundamental in me. It wasn't just an insult. It was a declaration of war. Until that moment, I had still held on to some naive thread of hope that this was all a misunderstanding born from stress and pride. I had clung to the possibility that underneath all the coldness, Cindy still saw me as her father, that she'd eventually come around. But now, staring at the forged medical note and the legal jargon dripping with veiled threats, I knew I had been wrong. Dead wrong. This wasn't confusion or neglect. This was strategy. A cold, calculated move to disarm me entirely. I drove straight to my doctor's office with a letter in my coat pocket and a quiet fury building in my chest. Dr. Kaufman had been my physician for the past 22 years. He'd seen me through Donna's illness, my gallbladder surgery, and every mundane checkup in between. When I handed him the copy of the forged note, he stared at it, then looked at me over his glasses. "This isn't from my office," he said flatly. "I know," I said, "but I need something from you. I want a full cognitive exam. I want documentation that I'm sound." He nodded slowly. "You think they're trying to take control?" "I know they are," I said. He scheduled the test for 2 days later. I passed it. Not just adequately, but comfortably. Memory, executive function, reasoning, all intact. The report ran 6 pages and concluded with a firm statement of full legal and mental capacity. With that in hand, I went back to Mr. Callahan. He reviewed the documents, cross-referenced them with the threat letter from Cindy's lawyer, and then did something I hadn't expected. He leaned back in his chair and smiled. "Walter," he said, "they overplayed their hand. This kind of move will not sit well in court, especially not with independent medical verification. I can file a formal rebuttal and counter-motion by the end of the week." "Do it," I said, "and let's take this further. I want to do more than defend myself." "What do you mean?" he asked. I took a breath. The foundation. I wasn't bluffing. If I'm going to be dragged into legal battles, I want something good to come out of it. I want you to set up a non-profit organization under Donna's name, something that can receive funds from the sale of the company, should it go through. And I want full administrative control. Callahan nodded with visible respect. "You're planning to beat them at their own game." "I'm planning," I said, "to remind them who they're dealing with." By the end of that week, the rebuttal had been filed, the foundation paperwork had been initiated, and I had been referred to a real estate lawyer named Evelyn Tran, who specialized in business succession disputes. She reviewed my position, ownership, financial contributions, administrative role during the early years, and confirmed that I not only had the legal right to block the sale, but could also initiate a full audit of the company's financials if I suspected fraud, which I did. Because as I dug deeper into the old business records, I started noticing inconsistencies. Vendor invoices that had never been paid, strange reimbursements with no receipts, bonuses issued to Cindy's name under consulting aliases. And when I traced back some of the bank records, I found transactions that looked suspiciously like personal expenses, being written off as company development. Designer handbags marked as branding materials. Luxury retreats logged as strategy sessions. The more I uncovered, the more I realized this wasn't just a daughter trying to cut her father out. This was someone who had spent years laundering her ambition through my silence. And so I made one final call to the investment firm that had sent the original acquisition letter. A man named Todd Walker, head of acquisitions, took the call. "I don't think we've spoken," I said. "I'm Walter Hensley, the legal owner of the company you're trying to purchase." There was a long pause, then a careful, measured reply. "We've been in discussions with your daughter, but yes, we're aware of your position." "I'd like to meet," I said. "In person. There are things you should know before you move forward." They agreed. 2 days later, I found myself sitting in a glass-paneled office in Chicago, across from 3 suited executives who expected to be dealing with a relic and instead found someone very much alive and ready to fight. I presented them with the ownership documents, the cognitive report, and a summary of the financial irregularities I had discovered. I watched their faces shift, from polite curiosity to cold calculation to quiet alarm. "This," Todd finally said, "complicates things." "I imagine it does," I replied. "But I'm not here to stop the deal. I'm here to change its terms." And then I laid it out. They could proceed with the acquisition, but 25% of the proceeds must be allocated to the Donna Hensley Foundation. I would sign, provided that Cindy would be removed from all executive decisions and the company would be brought into compliance with proper financial oversight. It was a bold ask, but I had leverage. And more than that, I had truth. They agreed to consider it and asked for documentation. I had everything ready by the next day. Within a week, they responded. The deal was on the table, but only under my terms. Cindy, I imagined, was going to lose her mind, and for the first time in years, I was fine with that. Cindy's fury arrived not as a scream or a slammed door, but as silence sharpened to a blade. For 2 full days after the investors accepted my revised terms, there was nothing. No phone call, no email, no attempt at diplomacy or damage control. Then, on the 3rd day, I received a letter, not from her, but from a different lawyer, a high-powered name from a Des Moines firm known more for celebrity divorces and corporate takedowns than for anything involving a small cosmetics company built on borrowed money and my generosity. The letter accused me of elder fraud, of using my status as legal owner to extort my daughter, of weaponizing a fabricated foundation for personal gain. It demanded I retract my interference with the sale or face immediate legal and financial repercussions. It was 10 pages of veiled threats, pompous language, and legal gymnastics designed to intimidate. At the end, there was a warning. Any further attempts to contact the investors would be considered tortious interference and subject to prosecution. I read it once, twice, then laughed out loud. Not the kind of laughter that comes from joy, but the dry, hollow kind that tastes like iron and memory. Because what they didn't understand, what Cindy had never understood, was that I had already lived through the worst days of my life, watching Donna die, slowly and painfully, watching our daughter drift away year after year, attending Christmas dinners alone while pretending I'd caught a cold so the neighbors wouldn't pity me. You can't threaten a man who's already been buried under silence and dug his way out with nothing but old photos and unpaid gratitude. I wasn't afraid. I was furious. I called Mr. Callahan and forwarded him the letter. He read it, sighed, and said, "They're pushing, but their foundation is made of sand. We've got the ownership, the medical reports, the history. Let them sue. They'll lose." Still, I wasn't satisfied with just defense. I wanted to understand what Cindy was really planning. And so I did something I hadn't done in years. I reached out to someone in her world, not her directly, but someone I knew she still trusted, Jonah, her son, my grandson, now 20, and in his 2nd year at the University of Iowa. He was the only one who had kept in touch with me after Donna's death, albeit sporadically. He'd send me birthday texts, short emails during exam week. We weren't close, but there was still a spark of connection. I called him on a Sunday evening, unsure if he'd pick up. To my surprise, he did. "Grandpa," he said, his voice low and cautious. "Hi, Jonah. I hope I'm not interrupting." "No," he said. "I'm just surprised." "I need your help," I said without preamble. There was a pause. Then he said, "Is this about Mom?" "Yes," I answered. Another pause. Then, more quietly, "I thought something was going on." I told him, briefly and without editorial, about the ownership documents, the attempted sale, the accusations, and the foundation. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he let out a long breath. "She said you were getting forgetful," he said. "That you'd signed over control and didn't remember, but I didn't believe her." "Why not?" "Because she's been rewriting stories for years," he said. "Things I remember clearly, she describes completely differently. It's like she edits the past to fit whatever version of herself she's trying to sell at the moment." I felt a weight lift from my chest. Someone saw her. Someone still saw me. "Do you still have access to her computer or email?" I asked. "I shouldn't," he said. "But she never changed the password from when I used to help her with social media. I can try." Within 2 days, Jonah had sent me a dozen screenshots, emails between Cindy and her new legal team, emails to the investors trying to preemptively discredit me, and one in particular that made my blood run cold. In it, she discussed a contingency plan in case the deal fell through. Declare me mentally unfit through court petition, assume conservatorship, and liquidate my assets to stabilize the family's finances. She had already consulted with 2 different specialists, one of whom offered to provide favorable documentation for a fee. I printed everything, catalogued every screenshot, and gave them to Mr. Callahan, who immediately began preparing a counterclaim for attempted financial abuse and fraudulent interference. Meanwhile, the foundation paperwork had been finalized. The Donna Hensley Fund for Women in Transition was now a registered non-profit with its own EIN, mission statement, and bank account. I opened it with an initial deposit of $10,000 from my own savings, just enough to activate operations. Our first grant was announced in the local newspaper, a $1,500 scholarship for a single mother going back to school to finish her nursing degree. I sat in my kitchen that morning reading the article, tears running down my cheeks. Not because I was proud, though I was, but because I could hear Donna's voice in my head saying, "That's my Walter." Cindy, predictably, did not respond well. That evening, she showed up at my house unannounced. No warning, no phone call, just headlights in the driveway and the click of her heels on the front porch. I opened the door and found her standing there in a gray trench coat, her face pale with fury. "You had no right," she hissed. "No right to involve Jonah. No right to start some vanity foundation. No right to dismantle everything I've built." I stepped aside, letting her in only because I didn't want the neighbors to see what was coming. She stormed past me into the living room and turned to face me like a prosecutor delivering closing arguments. "Do you think this makes you noble?" she demanded. "Do you think people will see you as some selfless old man fighting for justice? You're pathetic, Dad. You're clinging to relevance like it's an oxygen tank." I didn't respond. Not yet. I let her talk, let her fury fill the room. I watched her pace, watched the shadows jump on the wall with each angry gesture. "You were supposed to disappear," she said. "That was the agreement. You gave me the business. You gave me your blessing. You said you didn't care." "No," I said quietly. "I said I didn't need credit. I never said I didn't care." She froze, then looked at me with something that might have been contempt or pain or both. "I needed to move on," she said, softer now. Do you understand that? I couldn't stay your little girl forever. I had to become someone. And you always looked at me like I was failing. I stepped closer. I never looked at you like that. I was proud of you, even when you stopped calling, even when you lied. I was proud, but pride doesn't mean obedience. And it doesn't mean blindness. She sank onto the couch, suddenly deflated. I'm going to lose everything, she said. No, I said. You're going to lose control. That's different. She looked up. What do you want? I want you to stop pretending I'm dead. I want you to stop rewriting history. I want you to understand that your success was built on someone else's sacrifice, and I want that sacrifice honored. She didn't respond. She just sat there, silent, the anger slowly cooling into something heavier. Shame, maybe, or recognition. I didn't mean to become this, she whispered. I don't think you did, I said. But you did, and now you have to choose who you'll be next. She left soon after, not with rage, but with a strange kind of hollow stillness. I didn't know what her next move would be, but I knew mine. It was a cold morning when I received the notification from the court. The counterclaim for attempted financial abuse had been formally acknowledged, and a hearing was scheduled. My lawyer, Mr. Callahan, had prepared the documentation so thoroughly that even the court clerk, according to his report, had raised an eyebrow at the scale and clarity of evidence. Screenshots from Jonah's emails, the doctored medical note, the records of the investment firm, the forensic audit we'd quietly commissioned on the company's accounts, all of it assembled into one immovable structure that revealed the breadth of Cindy's deception. It was all there, black and white, without need for dramatization or embellishment. The facts spoke louder than any accusation I could ever make. I wasn't trying to destroy her. I'd never wanted that. But if this was the only language she and her new life understood, then so be it. In the days leading up to the hearing, Cindy remained silent. No calls, no visits, no emails, not even through her lawyers. She had retreated completely, as if by vanishing she could somehow erase the consequences looming on her horizon. I wondered if she was ashamed, or simply regrouping. Shame implies a conscience. Retreat, I've learned, often just means calculation. The hearing itself was uneventful in tone, if not in outcome. A modest room with wood-paneled walls, a judge with thin glasses and a clipped voice, a few members of the legal teams, and silence broken only by the sound of papers shifting and names being spoken aloud into the record. My presence wasn't legally required, but I attended anyway. I sat in the back, hands folded, eyes watching. Cindy was there too, flanked by her new attorneys, dressed in a blazer too sharp for the moment, makeup too flawless for truth. She didn't look at me. Not once. She kept her gaze on the floor, her lips pressed into a colorless line. Callahan presented our side with precision. Factual, unemotional, devastating. He showed the ownership trail, the history of my involvement, the medical verification of my cognitive clarity, and most damning of all, the leaked correspondence about their plan to declare me mentally incompetent to seize control of my assets. The judge listened, nodded, asked 2 short questions, and then looked toward Cindy's team. One of her lawyers stood, adjusted his tie, and offered a half-hearted rebuttal. He spoke of emotional strain, of familial misunderstanding, of intentions taken out of context. He suggested the foundation was a weapon, an emotional cudgel used to extract financial control, but even he didn't sound convinced. The judge, after a long pause, ruled without ceremony. The claims against me were without merit. The counterclaim would be allowed to proceed if I wished, and the ownership structure of the business remained entirely within my rights. No conservatorship, no financial surrender, and no court-ordered compliance. I left the building without speaking to Cindy. She had risen from her seat before the ruling was even fully pronounced, her heels echoing against the tiled floor as she exited the room like someone fleeing a fire that had already consumed her name. I didn't follow her. What was there to say? The words had already been spoken, in documents, in silence, in every unanswered phone call and birthday she had skipped. Some things, once spoken, don't need to be repeated. In the following days, everything moved quickly. The investment firm, now satisfied with the stability of the legal structure, pushed forward with the deal. Cindy, no longer in a position to control or sabotage it, was kept in the loop as a courtesy only. The final acquisition agreement was signed 2 weeks later in a conference room in Des Moines. I was there. So was Cindy. She didn't speak until the very end, when all the papers had been passed and the final check written. She turned to me, her voice dry, almost brittle. "So what now?" she asked. "You win?" I looked at her, not with anger, not even disappointment, but with the quiet gravity of a man who had spent too many years accepting shadows in place of family. "This isn't about winning," I said. "It's about remembering who helped you build the ladder before you started climbing it." She didn't respond. She left without saying goodbye. A few days later, the wire transfer came through. $1.2 million divided as per the agreement. My portion, after taxes and legal fees, amounted to just over $290,000. I immediately transferred $250,000 to the foundation's account. The remaining amount I split, some into savings, some into a trust I set up quietly for Jonah, should he ever need it. I didn't tell him. He would find out one day when it mattered. The foundation, meanwhile, began to grow faster than I'd imagined. Local media picked up the story. Applications flooded in. We awarded 10 scholarships in the first month alone. I hired a young woman named Tara as the foundation's coordinator. Smart, empathetic, efficient. She reminded me a little of Donna in her younger years. Fierce without being aggressive, calm without being meek. I began spending afternoons at the small office we rented in a shared building near the public library, answering emails, reviewing grant proposals, talking to social workers and counselors. I had purpose again, not borrowed from someone else's ambition. Mine. The last interaction I had with Cindy came 3 weeks later. She called late in the evening, 9:43 p.m., a time I rarely answer calls, but something compelled me to pick up. Her voice was quiet, no longer sharp, no longer masked in performance. "I read about the foundation," she said. "Did you?" I replied. "You named it after Mom." "Yes," I said. I thought she deserved it. There was a pause, long and soft. She would have liked it. "I think so, too." Another pause. Then, "I wanted to hurt you. I know that now. I didn't want to just move on. I wanted to prove I didn't need you. And when that didn't work, I tried to erase you. I'm not proud of any of it." I listened, uncertain whether to believe the tone or to brace for another turn. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she continued. "I just needed you to know I see it now." I let the silence sit for a moment. Then I said, "Thank you for saying that. I hope the foundation does good things," she added. "It already is," I said. That was the end of it. No grand apologies, no offers to reconnect. Just a threadbare moment of honesty, and then the line went dead. I stood by the window afterward, watching the streetlights cast their soft amber glow across the sidewalk, and I felt, not peace exactly, but clarity. The battle was over, and though the wounds were deep, I'd walked away with my name, my dignity, and something larger than either, my own legacy. Spring arrived later than usual that year. The trees along my street bloomed hesitantly, as if unsure whether they were allowed to start again. I felt much the same. There was no triumphant trumpet sound at the end of it all. No movie scene reunion, no neat ribbon tied around years of fracture and silence. Life, as I've learned, rarely offers such clean conclusions, but it does offer moments. Small, quiet, undeniable moments that signal something has shifted. Maybe not healed, but changed. I began walking to the foundation office most mornings, a slow 15-minute stroll with a cane Donna once gave me for my birthday, back when we still joked about old age as something theoretical. The walk took me past the park where she used to take Cindy when she was small. I passed it now like a living photograph, layers of memory folded into every bench and patch of grass. At the office, Tara greeted me with that firm kindness that never asked too many questions. We reviewed letters from applicants, women escaping abusive marriages, young mothers leaving shelters, widows trying to restart careers after decades of unpaid caregiving. I read every story, some twice, not because I needed to, but because I owed it to them. Each grant we issued felt like an answer to a question that had haunted me for years. Had anything I sacrificed made a difference? Now finally, I could say yes. Local news outlets began featuring the foundation regularly. One morning, I opened the paper and saw a front-page photo of one of our first recipients, Maria Delgado, a 32-year-old nursing student holding a certificate from us, smiling beside her 2 daughters. The headline read, "Second Chances, Powered by Legacy." I tore the article out and placed it beside Donna's photo on my mantel. She would have smiled at that, maybe laughed her soft, breathy laugh, and said, "That's my Walter." I said it aloud once, just to hear it in the room. Jonah visited a few times after the deal. He never asked for money, never mentioned the trust fund I'd quietly set up in his name. He brought me sandwiches from a trendy little cafe and showed me photos from his campus life. Roommates, projects, a girl he liked but hadn't told his mom about. We didn't talk about Cindy, not directly. But there was an understanding between us, something unspoken but felt. I saw the weight he carried, the confusion of loving someone who had hurt others without ever truly seeing the damage. I didn't try to solve that for him. I just made him tea, listened, and told him stories about Donna that made him laugh. Cindy, for her part, faded from my daily life. I didn't expect reconciliation, and none came, but neither did more lawyers or threats. The silence between us changed shape, from aggressive distance to something more like respectful withdrawal. I don't know what she tells herself now, what version of the story she clings to in order to sleep at night. I stopped trying to guess. Sometimes we don't get closure from others. Sometimes we carve it ourselves, out of truth and action and the firm decision to stop bleeding for someone who never learned how to bandage what they cut. One late afternoon, I sat on a bench near the park, watching the wind tilt the cherry blossoms in slow, deliberate waves. A young woman passed with a stroller, smiled at me, and I nodded in return. A man walked by with a briefcase, talking loudly on the phone about something that sounded like acquisition metrics. Somewhere behind me, 2 kids argued about who was it in a game I no longer understood, and I felt the oddest thing. Calm. Not joy, not sadness. Just a full, deep sense of calm. I hadn't gotten everything I wanted, but I had reclaimed what mattered. My name, my purpose, my voice. I don't know what Cindy will become. I don't know what she'll tell her friends, her clients, her reflection. But I know what I'll leave behind, not just a foundation, but a record. A quiet map of how one man, pushed into silence by the very people he loved, decided to speak not with vengeance, but with structure, not with bitterness, but with dignity. I won't be remembered as a burden. I've seen to that. When I returned home that evening, the light hit the living room just right. Long, golden, gentle. I walked over to the fireplace and adjusted Donna's photo, just slightly. Then I sat in my chair, took out the article about Maria, and read it again, not because I forgot what it said, but because I finally believed it was mine to read.